The hum of the engines was a steady backdrop to the low murmur of passengers chatting, flipping through in-flight magazines, or tapping away on their phones. The cabin lights were dimmed for the evening leg from Miami to Denver, but the air was tense for an entirely different reason. In the middle of the aisle, the clink of a dessert cart was drowned out by sudden, startled gasps. Claire Dawson froze as something cold and sticky pressed against her chest. She looked down just in time to see a smear of whipped cream sliding down the front of her crisp white blouse, glistening under the overhead lights. A plastic cup of half-melted chocolate mousse dangled from the hand of the tall, broad-shouldered man in 17C, his grin wide and unrepentant. Beside him, his friend in 17D chuckled, holding a can of aerosol cream like a trophy. "Sweetens the uniform," the first man said, his voice loud enough for 3 rows to hear. A ripple of laughter, uneasy, awkward, moved through the nearest seats. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably. Others glanced away, pretending not to see. But a few phones came up recording. Claire's heart pounded against her ribs. At 31, she had weathered drunk's turbulence, even medical emergencies, but this was different. This was a public violation, a calculated humiliation in her workplace, and she was trapped between the narrow seats with no immediate escape. She forced herself to breathe evenly. The temptation to shout, to lash out, surged hot in her chest, but her years in the Air National Guard had taught her that reactions were most powerful when timed with precision. She met the man's smug grin with a steady, unblinking stare. "Is that supposed to be funny?" she asked, her voice low but clear. His friend leaned forward. "Guess it depends on your sense of humor." A couple of passengers tittered nervously. Claire could feel the cream soaking into the fabric, the cool turning unpleasantly warm against her skin. But she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. Instead, she stepped back, pushing the dessert cart toward the rear galley with deliberate calm. She didn't rush to wipe the cream away. She let it sit there, a visual reminder of what had just happened, because she knew some passengers' memories would fade quickly unless the fallout was undeniable. As she reached the galley, the curtain swished shut behind her, cocooning her in a narrow stainless steel space. She braced her hands on the counter, eyes closed for a beat. Her mind flicked back to hours on the training mats, to instructors barking commands, to the satisfying snap of a wrist lock perfectly executed. If they wanted to turn her workplace into their playground, they were about to learn the cost of breaking the rules at 35,000 feet, and this lesson, it was going to hurt. Claire stood in the rear galley, the hum of the beverage chillers masking the rapid beat of her heart. Her blouse was sticky and cool against her skin, the faint scent of artificial vanilla clinging to the air. She didn't touch it. She didn't want to give herself the satisfaction of cleaning up until she had finished what she intended to do. The curtain swayed slightly as the plane rocked through a light patch of turbulence. She steadied herself with one hand on the counter, the other flexing slowly. Her fingers still remembered the precise grip of a C-clamp wrist hold, the turn of the hips that could drop a man twice her size to his knees. It had been years since she'd left the Air National Guard, trading fatigues for the fitted navy skirt and blazer of an airline uniform. But those skills had never left her. She had promised herself she'd never need to use them unless it was a matter of safety. But now, safety wasn't just about preventing a fall or handling a medical emergency. It was about protecting her dignity and sending a message to every passenger watching that she wasn't a victim. From her position, she could hear faint murmurs from the cabin beyond the curtain. Row 17 was still buzzing, deep chuckles, the metallic clink of ice in glasses, the low arrogance of men who thought they were untouchable. She pictured the layout of the cabin. The path to the lavatories passed directly by the galley. At some point during the next hour, one of them would come down for another drink, or to push the joke further. When they did, she would be ready. The other attendant on duty, Mark, stepped into the galley, his brows furrowed when he saw her. Claire, what the hell happened out there? Half the row looked like they wanted to disappear into their seats. She gave him a look that said, "Not now." "Handle the forward cabin for a few minutes," she said. "I've got this." Got what he asked, his voice low but incredulous. "Just the situation." Mark hesitated, glancing at the smear of cream on her chest, then nodded slowly. He'd flown with her long enough to know that tone meant she was in control, even if he didn't know the plan. Claire positioned herself by the counter, angled so that she could see down the narrow aisle through the gap in the curtain. The cabin lights had been dimmed for the evening service, but the glow from the overhead panels spilled just enough light for her to watch. Sure enough, within minutes, the taller one she thought his name might be Trent stood from his seat. His gait had the lazy confidence of someone who believed the world would always move aside for him. He said something to his friend, then started down the aisle toward the galley, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a small bottle of whiskey he'd swiped from the cart. Claire's breathing slowed. Her muscles loosened, not tightened, just like her instructor had taught her. The key to ending something quickly was to start relaxed. When he pushed past the curtain with a smirk, she didn't step back. She stepped forward. Trent barely registered the shift in her posture before it happened. Claire's right hand shot out, gripping his wrist with the precision of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. The motion was smooth, fluid, almost gentle until she twisted. His smirk collapsed into a startled grunt as his knees buckled. What he managed, but his words caught when her other hand pressed firmly against the back of his elbow, forcing him to bend forward. The galley was narrow, but that worked to her advantage. She pivoted her hips, guiding him sideways, so his shoulder clipped the stainless steel counter with a dull thud. His whiskey bottle clattered to the floor, rolling under the cart. From the other side of the curtain, a murmur rose, passengers catching fragments of the commotion. "You're going to want to keep your hands to yourself from now on," Claire said evenly, her voice just loud enough for anyone close to hear. Trent tried to jerk free, but the movement only made the hold tighter. His breath hissed between his teeth. "Let go." "I will," she said, but first, her knee shot upward, driving hard into the meat of his thigh just above the knee. The sharp, controlled impact sent him stumbling backward, clutching his leg. He collided with the sidewall, his eyes wide in a mix of pain and shock. Before he could recover, the curtain jerked open, and his friend, a thick-necked man with a sunburnt face who'd been sitting in 17D, appeared. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded, glaring at Claire. "Perfect timing," she said. He took a step forward, jaw tight, clearly, planning to get in her face. She pivoted on her heel, closing the space faster than he expected, and planted the heel of her palm squarely into the center of his chest. The force drove him back into the bulkhead, knocking the breath out of him with a wheeze. Now, both men were in the galley, one limping, the other gasping for air. Claire's voice was calm, but carried the kind of authority that cut through noise. "This is my workplace. You don't touch me. You don't touch anyone. If you can't respect that you're not passengers anymore, you're a security problem." Somewhere beyond the curtain, someone clapped softly. Another voice muttered, "Good for her." Trent's face flushed red as he tried to straighten. "You're gonna regret." She cut him off with a glance so sharp, it might as well have been another strike. "Sit down, or I'll make sure you arrive in Denver in zip ties." The silence that followed wasn't just compliance. It was the moment they realized she wasn't bluffing. At 35,000 feet, she wasn't just a uniform. She was part of the crew with federal authority. And she knew exactly how to use it. Trent glanced at his friend. They both stepped toward the aisle, but not before casting one last glare at her. Claire didn't flinch. She watched them go, the tension in her shoulders easing only after they dropped into their seats, chastened and quiet. The whipped cream stain on her blouse was still there, but so was something else. The unshakable certainty that she had just taken back every ounce of control they'd tried to steal. The curtain swayed shut behind them, but the energy in the cabin had shifted. Claire could hear the low hum of passengers, whispering voices rippling like a current down the aisle. A few chuckles broke through, not in mockery now, but in quiet admiration. Mark appeared again, his brows raised high. I saw them limping back to their seats. You okay? Claire adjusted the dessert cart, her hand steady. Better than okay. But we're not done. She knew how this worked. If you let a public incident fade without addressing it, rumors would twist the truth before you even touched down. She wasn't going to let the story become the overreacting flight attendant. She wanted the entire cabin to know what had happened and why it mattered. Stepping into the aisle, she moved with the same confidence she used when addressing passengers before takeoff. A few heads turned immediately. Others followed as the hush spread. She stopped midway between the Bullies row and the front of the cabin, her voice projecting clearly without shouting. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, we all want a safe and respectful flight. That means no one crew or passenger is ever allowed to be touched without their consent. What happened earlier wasn't a joke. It was harassment. And harassment on a plane isn't just wrong, it's against federal law. A murmur of agreement passed through the seats. In this job, she continued, we take care of each other. We protect each other. So, if you see something wrong, you speak up. You don't laugh it off. From the corner of her eye, she saw Trent staring at the seat back in front of him, jaw clenched, his friend shifting uncomfortably. The passengers around them avoided eye contact, their body language making it clear they'd been marked as the source of trouble. Then it happened, a single clap from somewhere in the middle rows. Another joined in. Soon a smattering of applause spread through the cabin. Claire didn't bask in it. She simply nodded once, letting it happen without breaking her professional composure. Thank you for your attention, she said, then returned to the galley as the chatter picked up again. This time, filled with words like good for her and about time. Mark grinned as she passed. You just became a legend on this route. Claire didn't answer, but the faintest smile curved her lips. She knew legends didn't happen because of one dramatic move. They happened when you combined action with a clear message. And tonight, that message had been delivered at cruising altitude to a captive audience. Up front, the captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and clipped. Flight attendants, please meet me in the forward galley when available. Claire exchanged a look with Mark. She knew this was standard. After a serious incident, the captain needed to log it and decide next steps. As she walked toward the front, she passed the row where Trent and his friend sat. Neither man looked at her. Both stared ahead, silent. She didn't need their apology. Their silence was enough. The forward galley was quiet, except for the soft hum of the coffee maker. Captain Reeves stood with his arms folded, his expression neutral, but his eyes sharp. Claire, he began, I've already spoken to a few passengers who witnessed the incident. You handled yourself well and within policy. Claire nodded once. They crossed the line. I wasn't going to let it slide. You won't have to. When we land, law enforcement will be waiting at the gate. I've also authorized passenger restraint if they act up again. His tone was firm, final. It was a small victory, but it was enough. As she made her way back toward the rear of the cabin, she noticed how the atmosphere had shifted entirely. Passengers who had seen what happened now met her eyes with nods of respect. One older woman in 15A whispered, "Good job, honey," as she passed. A teenage girl near the back gave her a small thumbs up, the kind that said, "You showed them." Mark was restocking drinks when she slipped back into the galley. "So the cavalry's waiting in Denver?" he asked. "Yep," she replied, checking the service checklist. "And they're going to get a very thorough explanation of how these two spent their flight." For the remainder of the trip, Trent and his friend kept their heads down. They didn't ring the call button, once didn't make eye contact with anyone, and their earlier arrogance had evaporated completely. The stain on her blouse was still faintly visible, but it no longer felt like an insult. Now, it was a mark of the line she'd drawn, one they wouldn't dare cross again. As the wheels touched down in Denver, the seatbelt sign chimed off, and passengers began gathering their belongings. The captain's voice came over the intercom with one final announcement. "All passengers, please remain seated for a moment, as we deplane some individuals first." Claire stood in the aisle a few feet ahead of row 17, arms folded, expression calm but unyielding. Two uniformed officers stepped aboard their presence, drawing curious glances. Without argument, Trent and his friend rose from their seats. They avoided looking at her as the officers escorted them toward the exit. The door closed behind them, and the cabin seemed to exhale. Claire resumed helping passengers, deplane, her tone warm and professional, as though nothing had happened. But in her chest, there was a quiet satisfaction, not the thrill of retaliation, but the solid weight of having stood her ground. When the last passenger stepped off, Mark leaned against the galley wall and grinned. "You know, I've flown with a lot of people, but that was something else." Claire smirked. Just another day at 35,000 feet, outside the jet bridge. The terminal lights glowed bright against the dark evening sky. Claire walked toward them with her head high, knowing the story would travel, and she was perfectly fine with that. If it meant one less bully thought they could get away with crossing the line, then it was worth every second. Harassment thrives on silence, but Claire proved that silence is a choice, and so is action. By standing her ground with calm authority, she reclaimed not just her dignity, but the respect of everyone who witnessed it. Her measured response sent a message that being professional doesn't mean being passive, and that boundaries, once enforced, can change the balance of power instantly. Bullies expect fear or retreat. They rarely expect strength backed by skill. The lesson is clear. No matter where you are on the ground or in the air, your voice, your stance, and your self-respect matter most.